Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Fitba on Radio Saltire for another week. The Walking Dead's just finished on Sky. That was going to lead to a joke about QPR, but they've only gone and won. They beat Aston Villa. Who would have seen that coming? That'll teach me to prepare for the show. So Harry Redknapp gets a last-minute reprieve. And speaking of last-minute reprieves, we'll get onto the Edinburgh Derby very, very soon.
What a link.
It's me. Tedious link.
And well, that's 7 weeks in now, so we've got a level of professionalism that needs to be upheld.
It's moved up a notch.
We know each other well enough to have a fight now, so...
Right, so Mikey has pitched an opening question for this week, which is a song that is in some way relevant to how either team will be feeling after the game at the weekend. Mikey, seeing as it's your question, do you want to lead us off?
Well, having suggested the question, I completely forgot to actually give an answer. So on a whim, I'm going to go with Deja Vu by Beyonce.
Okay,
That's a good one.
Feels like we keep on sort of shooting ourselves in the foot in derby matches, and on an absolute last minute thought process, that's what I'm going with.
Fair enough, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Scott, you got one?
Yeah, it wasn't so much either team, but I mean, as much as I've kind of backed this guy in previous weeks, Alan Stubbs, I mean, his after match comments, I can only insist on saying "dry your eyes, mate" by the Streets, because I mean, it was pretty ludicrous, some of the stuff he was coming out with.
The fighting talk has started early.
The last civil show is finished now.
It will continue throughout. We've already had discussions about that in terms of, we've had compliments from outside in terms of, for a group of rival fans, you all really respect each other's opinion. And it was like, I wait until this week.
it was bubbling last week. I think this week it's going to take over.
They've never seen the scrap we had before we came on air.
I'm still recovering.
Connor, what you got, mate?
Well, I realise this is trite, and this is probably like the lamest answer I've ever come up with, but the first thing that came into my head was "Keep On Moving" by Five. When I saw Mickey's question earlier, and I had to re-listen to it when I got home, and actually, that's the thing, that's try and be positive. It's been a bit of a kick in the teeth yet again, but we need to keep the momentum going. But in terms of Derby characters, and if we're getting nasty now, I think Callum Patterson could have had Jake the Peg by Rolf Harris, because he's starting to look a bit like Rolf Harris, and he tried to remove a leg for himself from Malonga. So yeah, I think he's Jake the Peg.
Let's move on quickly. What you got, Ross?
Well, it's the classic from Miley Cyrus. Wrecking Ball. After that absolute screamer that pretty much snapped the goals. So I'll leave Ozturk for Wrecking Ball.
I'm carrying on a similar theme. I feel like I've done a wee bit too much work for this, to be honest, because I've got about 12 songs. So let's list them quickly, because I'm going to get them all in. I did the work for this. Last Minute Miracle by the Shirelles, Hit Me With Your Best Shot by Pat Benatar, Eat My Goal by Collapsed Lung, Goals in Slow Motion by Future to the Left, Don't Shoot, She Cried, the Dandy Warhols. That kind of summed up every Hearts fan's feeling just as the ball left his foot. But the best one from a Hearts perspective definitely is Young Turks by Rod Stewart, which features the lines, "Young Hearts be free tonight, time is on your side," and especially because the term Young Turk is slang for a rebellious youth who acts contrary to what is deemed normal by society. Now, if that's not a Liam Ozturk, then I don't know what is. And from a Hibs perspective, I thought Lucky Strike by Maroon 5 or Wishing I Was Lucky by Wet Wet Wet. Right, let's move on then. What I thought we would do before we move on to the discussion of the derby and the big decisions that shaped the game, everyone was, involved in this game, so we've all got opinions across all sides, so I want to keep everyone involved as much as possible, even when we get on to the discussion of either side. We're all entitled to opinions, so it makes sense to treat it that way. So what we'll start with is things which, in theory at least, were the same for both sides, and we'll analyse the teams in detail later. So let's start with the performance of the referee. Does anyone have any opinions on Bobby Madden's display?
Well, he seemed to get the red card definitely right, and both bookings that he handed out to Hearts players. I thought he had a decent game. I mean, yesterday I was shouting just about everything I could at him, but looking back at the game, watching a little bit of it on the TV and that, it wasn't a bad performance actually, to be fair.
The only thing I noticed that I need to watch it again, to be fair, is the little scrap, if you can call it that, between Gray and Eckersley. It did look like that Gray actually punched Eckersley in the chest, and from the reaction from Eckersley. Obviously they knew each other. It just seemed like, oh, it's you. Kind of like if you had a road race with a driver and you got out and he's your pal, you're like, oh, all right, okay, how you doing? You're right. But yeah, I think everyone should look back at that and tweet in to say basically if it was or not, because it did look like he actually hit him in the chest. And Eckersley just didn't react. I
have to say, I must have missed that entirely.
I know what he's referring to. I didn't see the punch, but I do remember them sort of coming together and then basically hugging it out pretty much straight away.
So that's why I'm not 100% sure. I'm asking the listeners basically to get in touch, because I wasn't clear. I've not seen it again, but it did look pretty bad at the time.
But a minute ago, you were fit to string David Gray up. But now he's backtracked. What about the Hibs perspective on the refereeing performance?
I think he kept control of the game pretty well. I think in the first half I thought Fontaine was a little lucky not to get a yellow for one of his tackles near the start, and I think the ref made the right decision overall not to book him, because the game was played in pretty good spirits. Apart from Patterson, there was no nasty play. I think he was quite right to book Oxley for time wasting. I think I was starting to get on everyone's nerves a bit. I don't think that Oxley was trying to run the clock down or anything like that. I think he was just enjoying annoying the Jambos. It just got, it was funny the first time, and then he did it again, and the Hibs fans clapped, and then he did it a third time and a fourth time, and it was getting on everyone's nerves by that point. So I think it was quite right to book him. Yeah, apart from that, I think it was a good performance by Madden.
Mikey?
Yeah, just quite reflect what everyone said. I think the key thing is that where he could, he tried to make himself invisible. Didn't really try and get too heavily into it and picking up niggly things and let the game go on. There was probably quite a few instances where there had been these sort of trips and stuff, but he let the game flow on. And no, he had a perfectly good game. I'm resisting the urge to say that it's been a while for a Hibs fan to see that in a derby match, but no, he had a good game. The red card was spot on. Alan Moss filled outside the box by Boabin, so key decisions were spot on.
I mean, that has to be a first, probably, that both sides of the divide in an Edinburgh Derby would admit to being happy with a referee's performance. I mean, hopefully Bobby Madden's not listening, because that will go straight
trust me,
to
that
his
was
head.
definitely just us.
Yeah, there's a lot on both sides that weren't happy. So
yeah, probably, but then we try and stay relatively in the middle of that, don't get too carried away either side.
Yep.
On another subject that affected both sides equally, what did we think the impact of the conditions were? It didn't necessarily come across on TV, but being there in person, it was a horrible, horrible day. The winds were swirling, to say the least, and it wasn't necessarily conducive for good football. Do we think that the teams had to adjust to that?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that there's been worse games of football played in better conditions in terms of the football was being played. So considering, and even with the goal, you thought the wind would be chucking that everywhere.
Yeah.
It was like straight as an arrow, and then it obviously dipped at the last minute. So both teams got well. I think there was times obviously when you noticed it straight away, any high balls, it was just kind of going left or right, goalkeepers kicking it out. But overall, I mean, I've seen a lot worse in better conditions, definitely.
Yeah, I'd agree. Credit to both teams. I think if guys like Michael Nelson were still playing in a match like this, I think you would have seen a far poorer game for it. I thought that obviously Fontaine and Wilson, especially in the first half, seemed to be toiling a bit with the wind, with balls just sort of bouncing over their head and being unable to clear them. Thankfully for both players, they both got away with those incidents. But yeah, generally speaking, Hearts, especially in the second half. First half, I felt they were playing a few sort of long, aimless balls towards So and El Hashnui, but second half, Boabin and Gomez seemed to come short, and we seem to be keeping the ball in the deck a lot better.
I thought it was a compliment to both goalkeepers, actually, how well they dealt with corners, considering now and again it helped them in that it seemed to hold the ball up a wee bit, so it made it easier for them to catch it at its highest point. But there was definitely an unpredictability to the way it was reacting to the wind, and they both actually seemed quite composed in the face of that. Like you say, Scott, I think there was one moment where the wind really came into play, which was when Hanlon totally misjudged the bounce of that ball and it carried beyond him, and El Hasnaoui probably should have scored with a one-on-one. Okay, so in terms of the conditions, we've covered that. The last two things before we go to the first break, and then we will come back and discuss the managers in detail: the attendance and the atmosphere. We'll start with the Hibbies, because for obvious reasons you're more used to Easter Road than the rest of us. What did you think of those for an Edinburgh Derby? Obviously the attendance was down on what we would expect.
Yeah, when I arrived at the ground, I think I was a little disappointed with the Hibs attendance, and I think that's something that might continue for a little while until we start picking up a bit of run of form. But the atmosphere itself, I mean, I sit I sit in the east, and I found myself sandwiched between two singing sections this time. I try and sit in a quiet bit because I can't really be bored with all that kind of thing. But then
you football fashionista,
but these these kids with the drum and stuff actually moved just in front of me, so they were just a couple of rows down. And it was actually, I thought it was much better to have that singing section with the drum and everything right in front of the pitch with all their flags and all the rest. I mean, bless them, they're having a good time. So I thought that did. I don't know. I mean, obviously I was right in the middle of it, so it sounded quite loud to me. But I thought that really did improve to the atmosphere. I can imagine that sort of translate onto the pitch a bit better with moving the singing section down a bit, so that they can interact with the players a bit more. So I think, despite the fact that we didn't have as many fans there as we should have, I think the atmosphere was pretty good from my point of view. Hearts fans were awfully quiet, I think, for most of the game, considering. And no, that's not me bragging or anything. But
I totally agree.
The Hearts fans were a lot quieter than usual, considering the run that you've been on, obviously until the 92nd minute. So I think the Hibs fans made plenty of noise.
I'd actually like to agree. This is one of the things that I wrote down in my notes earlier on. Hearts, since that cup final, which I won't bang on about, we have turned up to Easter Road, and bar one occasion at New Year this year where there did seem to be a really good atmosphere for the Hearts end. I think purely because of the situation we're in. We were bottom of the league, we were losing every week. There does seem to be, when the chips are down, a bit of a siege mentality, and sometimes the fans come out in not so much bigger numbers but louder, and I think you could probably see that for the Hibs end yesterday. Generally what happens is if you're sort of the unfancied team for a little while, it does seem to bring out a bit more vocally out of the supporters, especially the youngsters. Whereas in the Hearts end, there just seems to be a little bit of malaise in terms of the atmosphere. Now at home and away, we kind of turn it up before the game, and then obviously if we score, and then at the end of the game if we get a result. But sort of for large sections, there isn't really a lot going on. There just seems to be a lot of sort of groaning and moaning about what's going on the park.
Yeah, well, there is the thing of feeling the need to be the 12th man. And actually, sometimes when your team's poorer on the park, you feel like you need to drag a performance out of them, or at least give them a platform to put on a performance. Whereas I agree with you that there is a wee bit of an expectation of, well, you guys should be giving us something to sing about. And for 90 minutes, they gave us very little to sing about, and as a result, there wasn't much singing. Whereas the fans should probably take more of a responsibility to set that atmosphere up.
I've definitely felt that. I mean, since that cup final, I remember the game straight away when we played Hibs at Easter Road, and Driver put us 1-0 in front, and it was almost like celebrating a goal in a training match. There just seemed to be a kind of, well, we're just going to expect this now, and that doesn't seem to have moved away. Even although we've toiled away in a few derby games since that day. I don't know what it is. That's something that Hearts fans need to address in a big crowd now, and obviously try and make up for that in the next derby match.
Touching on the Hearts support, I think there's possibly erring on the side of caution, given the last time Hearts turned up at Easter Road with an unbeaten record. So he can end up with egg on their face, being quite vocal about it. So I think there's probably erring on the side of caution on that front as well.
There is definitely a presence of that in the Heart support, and I like the confidence aspect of it. I think fans should be allowed to get carried away, because I think that carries onto the park in a positive way. But there were so many people who said, and it was only when the final whistle went that Hearts fans allowed themselves to sing "We Are Unbeatable."
Well, after the relegation party, apparently at Tynecastle, I think we're allowed to say whatever we want.
But there were so many people who were saying, "I hope I never hear We Are Unbeatable again," and you're thinking, well, it's just bravado. That's what fans are there for.
It doesn't really affect anything.
No, exactly. You may end up with egg on your face, but ultimately, if you can't enjoy an 11-game unbeaten run, what are you going to enjoy?
I think there's a wee touch of that involved. I would certainly say from the Hibs side of things, it's probably the most positive atmosphere at Easter Road in a long time.
Yeah.
Because the team started really well in a big match. We've been starting well against other sides, obviously famously kind of dropping away this season in the second half, but in a big match, especially against Hearts, it's been a long time since we had a really good start and looked like the team that was in control of the match for spells. So I think that made a difference to the crowd. We created chances, obviously went ahead right at the end of the first half, but we looked a relative threat for a lot of the first half, and I think that made a difference to the crowd, seeing us play with a bit of confidence, a bit of bravado. And for spells in the first half, Hearts kind of resorted to pumping it along towards Osman and El Hassanou, and I think that gave everyone a wee bit of confidence. Obviously the football came in the second half from Hearts, but I I think that certainly affected the positivity coming out of the stands for a change.
Having said about how subdued at times the Hearts support potentially were, the compliment to everyone involved and at the game was that there was a real clash between the pictures and the sound, and that there was times where the ball was in the corner and it looked like an empty stadium. All you could see really were empty seats or a couple of guys and a couple of kids, and that was really it. And then when there was incidents, the roar of the crowd really dominated the TV coverage, and it seemed like the sound was from a different game. And to have 7,000 empty seats and yet the atmosphere be that intense and come across on telly, I did think it was quite an odd experience when you watch it back. It's a strange thing to see, but a positive thing, and I think that's why people were so struck by it. No matter what your reaction to the goal itself, when that Ozturk strike hits the back of the net, that roar is electric, and anyone watching that, be it on Facebook or seeing it on the Sport Bible repost, that's what draws them into thinking, that game's not as Mickey Mouse as we thought it was. That's in the Scottish Championship, and look at how into this people are, and it is a good advert for the game, as I think numerous people said on the coverage on BT Sport yesterday.
Yeah, and to think with the attendance as well, there was more at the Hearts Dumbarton game the week before than was at the Edinburgh Derby.
He had to get that one in.
I mean, what can you say about that?
Yeah, no, it is a strange situation, definitely.
It's very strange. I mean, how many games can you say that? It's
I think it's indicative of the general atmosphere at Easter Road surrounding the whole club. I don't think anybody expected anything different, to be honest.
But kudos to the fans that turned up, though. I mean, they did make it obviously hard for the Hearts support to get in it, definitely.
Well, let's leave that there. We will be back in 2 minutes to discuss the managers and their performance in detail. Stay with us on Radio Saltire for Monday Night Football.
Radio Saltire is a community radio station located in Trinent and East Lothian, who are looking for presenters and station volunteers of all ages. So if you think you've got what it takes or always wanted to give it a go, we can train you up and give you that opportunity. So please get in touch by emailing info@radiosaltire.org or contact us using the website www.radiosaltire.org, community radio station for Scotland.
Thanks for staying with us on Monday Night Football on Radio Saltire. Before we go any further, get in touch with us on facebook.com/Monday Night Football, FITBA, or at MN Football on Twitter. Let us know what you thought of the game yesterday. Let us know your reaction to the goal or to the major talking points, and we will be sure to read them out on air. For now, we're going to move on to a discussion on the managers, given that both sides have managers who are fairly inexperienced in general terms, and this was only a second derby for each. I'm really interested to hear from you guys how you think they fared. So with that in mind, I'd like you to tell me a few things about each of them. So we're going to start with the starting lineup and tactics. How do we think that each manager fared? We'll start with the home team. So Alan Stubbs, what did you think, guys?
Well, he lined up exactly as I hoped he would, so I think he nailed it personally. He made the right call. So he got Fontaine fit, which is what he wanted, and I think all in he had a pretty solid match. Had a right good scrap with So. The midfield did exactly what I hoped that they would in terms of strangling the influence that Blavin and Gomez could have, and we had a lot of the possession, and it allowed Allen and McGeoch in particular to be really influential going forward. Robertson, I think, provided a really good shield, which against Livingston we sort of thought the same, but was it going to work against a bit more of a kind of quality side? Yeah. Gave that protection, allowed the full-backs to get on as well. He gave a wee bit of sort of screen to the centre-halves. My only disappointment was, well, not my disappointment, I thought the front two were very much in and out of it. Cummings was not really in the game that much. Had one wee chance, I think, in the first half. Felt his right foot, proved how left-footed he is. With a bit of a kind of sort of dab at it. Yeah. Malonga was in and out. Thought he should have done a lot better with the header at the start of the second half. Allen whipped in a nice ball. Should at least been getting on target. A bit too much of a sort of wee kind of faint touch on it.
He almost made it look more like a half chance.
It was a really good chance.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't moving that much behind him, and I thought Danny Handlin was quite ineffective, and I was hoping for a bit more from him. But like we were saying last week, we're not really sure what the sort of alternative is just now, because, well, I'll touch on it in a minute, but when he came off and the substitutions were made, the guys who we thought would be alternatives didn't really bring the positivity that we wanted.
We will very much touch on that in a minute. Connor, what was your thoughts on the starting lineup and the way that they were employed?
Much like Mikey, there's not much I would have changed, especially looking at our bench. I think that's pretty much the strongest Hibs team that we can get at the moment, sort of injuries aside. Just touching on what Mikey was saying about our front two, Malonga and Cummings, I think they're both good players, but I don't think they've got great chemistry between them. I think Cummings' enthusiasm probably got the better of him a little yesterday. I think he was possibly trying a bit too hard sometimes, and it was just resulting in maybe a few bad decisions or mishits, or clipping off his back heel or whatever. Whereas Malonga just quite an unusual attitude. He's scored 5 goals since he joined us last month, so we can't really be complaining about him. But I think he gets on quite a lot of Hibs fans' nerves, just with his general demeanour and persona and perceived lack of enthusiasm.
There does certainly seem to be a school of thought that he's rather lazy.
Yeah. Well, there was I remember one sort of quite near near where I was sitting, and the ball skied up into the air. Instead of chasing it, he just sort of watched it sort of drifting off and didn't chase after it, and that just drives people nuts, especially in a derby. Yeah. But he's clearly a good player, but I think between them they don't seem to have a great chemistry. I think Cummings, as a young player, would probably benefit more playing alongside someone like El Alagui when he comes back. Someone that's got quite a bit of charisma, probably was a lot like Cummings when he was younger, and can act as a sort of a big brother figure to him, help him out a little. So the front two, Malonga scored obviously, but you just like to see a bit more drive and enthusiasm, even after the game when he was, I don't know if English isn't his first language, but he seemed very nonplussed. That might just be the way he is. And as a feared handling, as Mikey said, wasn't quite as effective as we wanted. Maybe Kennedy would have been a good shout in that position instead of handling. But he had an okay game, as he often does. By no means was he bad, and was responsible for setting up quite a few of the missed chances.
He does drift in and out, as you said last week, though. It can be influential 1 minute and then not seen for 20.
That's it. He just tends to disappear for a little while without actually performing badly, and that seems to be a common theme with Danny handling. Maybe Stubbs will give him a bit more game time and he'll start to come into it a little more, because he had some good moments yesterday, but there were large chunks of the game where it was missing. We
did touch on it a bit last week, though, that the central midfield was the big positive for Hibs in terms of their starting lineup, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Between McGeoch and Scott Allen, those are two players which I think are fantastic to watch, really enjoyable. You feel like Hibs are going places when those two are on form. And with Scott Robertson playing sort of at the back end of that diamond, just sort of clearing up, keeping an eye on what way the attacks are coming and helping out the defence, which can be a little shaky sometimes. I think that's a fantastic situation that the Stubbs has ended up in there, and the tweaking is sort of starting to pay off.
Moving on to Robbie Nielsen then, are we agreed that he came second best in this starting lineup / tactics category?
In the beginning, I do believe that. There was a couple of things that I would have put in that I mentioned last week. For instance, I would have put McHattie in this game. Eccles did have a good game, but I believe we were too defensive from the off. I think they got their joy because they were winning a lot of second balls. They were again overcrowded in the middle, and a lot of these kind of balls that were coming off, they were always going to Gray or to Stevenson. So I think we should have pushed up like we did in the second half. Pretty much how we lined up in the second half is how we should have lined up straight away. Our starting position was a lot higher, but in the first half it was pretty much McGeoch and Allen having a lot of joy, and again they were getting protection from Robertson. So in terms of up front as well, I thought So and El Has were again just not mobile enough for this type of game, and it seemed that they weren't playing. And it's weird how we mentioned last week all these players that we think were going to turn it on, like Cummings and So, and we're coming here today and we're saying they were passengers. You know what I mean? So I believe
we were right in a lot of other respects. Don't discredit us too much.
Yeah, I know. But in terms of the way we lined up initially, yes, but I think Rob Nielsen got it right. Which we'll come on to with the subs.
We certainly will. Scott, you're still sticking steadfastly to your starting lineup from last week.
Well, I think I was proved right by yesterday's first half performance. I did say that we needed to bring Holt in, we needed to go like for like in midfield, and we needed to sacrifice either King or El Hashnui to make that happen. I didn't see anything in that first 45 minutes yesterday to prove otherwise, that I was wrong. I'm not going to give Nielsen too much stick. I mean, he's not got much wrong so far this season. He is still learning as a manager, and he did seem to identify those problems and then obviously change it in the second half with the substitution of Walker for El Hashnui.
On that subject then, we've acknowledged that we think Robbie Neilson lost out in the first battle. Is the consensus that he won the second battle though, which was substitutions and tactical tweaks?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. I have had to raise this a couple of times regarding Stubbs and his substitutions previous weeks, even in games where Hibs are winning. And again, he did baffle me slightly yesterday. Not so much when I was at the game, I was too busy shouting at all the Hearts players at that point, but when I went home and thought about it, I thought, well, why not just, especially when Hearts went down to 10 men, why not have 2 banks of 4 and maybe bring on an extra midfielder just to shore up the midfield? You could see McGeoch was dying a little bit on his backside, especially when trying to get over to cover Osturk for the goal. Bring on Craig. I know we've had a bit of a go at him.
I think that's what we need.
Maybe bring on Craig instead of, say, Kennedy, Stanton and Harris. It just seemed a little bit like I'm just going to throw them on for the sake of it.
Well, the strange thing on that subject was that Hibs seemed to go to a more conservative style while bringing on more attacking players, which seemed to clash.
The balance completely. What we've criticised Craig for a number of weeks was the way that he slowed the game down. I think that's pretty exactly what we needed.
Yeah, we needed an absolute
take the sting out of that. Yeah,
somebody to just come in there, but it had to be. He would just ping it in at the corners because Cummins would still do the shift and still at the corners. Guys that came on would get in the corners, but we needed a guy who was just going to slow it down for us, not to our detriment for a change. And like I agree, I think the guys that came on didn't fit the system that we were playing. Harris is a winger. We weren't playing with wingers. We needed to have guys who were going to retain that sort of tight bank in the midfield. I think we had to accept that Hearts were getting more joy out wide having brought Walker into the game and be really, really tight and really solid. And these guys still don't have that. I think that maturity and discipline, especially in a relatively new system for them, to stick to that.
Connor, what should Alan Stubbs have done?
Well, yeah, as we were just saying, I mean, I hate to say it because it sounds very conservative, but we did need to just bring that total spoiler on and have Liam Craig in the middle of the park. Possibly, I mean, you know, Kennedy as well, but just looking at our bench here, there's not really a great deal else he could have done, except, you know, I would not have brought Alex Harris on, and it just seems a shame because I really want him to be a good player, but it just seems like he's not good enough to say the least. Perhaps Stanton giving him a try, but Alex Harris just is a shadow of the player he seemed to promise to be near the start. So that was a mistake, and the 2 young laddies on at the same time, it was just, I don't remember a single thing either of them done, to be honest. I think Stanton got stuck in a couple of times and Harris did very little.
I think Stanton's got more heart. Like he's quite up for getting involved in winning his tackles and doing the chasing. Harris seems a wee bit kind of, I don't want to say gutless, but he's not got that sort of roll your sleeves up and get the shift put in, do the dirty yards, make the tackles, track your man. And I think that was everything that was required for those last 15-20 minutes.
It's a funny one though, because Stubbs' substitutions weren't necessarily wrong, but they were just in conflict with the game plan that he seemed to be implementing at that point. If he made those subs and they went all out for a second goal, they could have well worked. The fact is, Hibs didn't really seem to want to commit to going for that second goal.
10 yards in the second half, and they had their defenders basically defending on the edge of their own box. So why then do you bring on Harris, Stanton and Kennedy? The only thing I can think of is possibly Stubbs was thinking, well, if we win today, it maybe be good to get some of these guys on the park for 10 minutes, get them maybe into used to sort of winning a derby, you know, because it hasn't been great for them over the last sort of year or so when they were expecting to win these games. And maybe he just felt, you know, let's get these younger guys on and let's get them into that sort of winning mentality against Hearts. I can only just second guess it.
Yeah, maybe trying to do a wee few too many things at once.
I think Booth could be an option as well. He's a more defensive minded player, giving us maybe more of a spread as if they wanted to go to a 4-man midfield with wide players. Then Booth gives you that little bit more of, I want to say defensive awareness, but he's not the greatest defender, but he's not an out and out winger, and he might have just doubled up with Stevenson as well because he was getting double teamed quite a lot. down that side. But I think Booth might be a better shout than bringing on one of those guys to just give a bit more protection.
Okay.
I think we need to all pinch ourselves tomorrow after saying that Liam Craig should have been brought on.
No, I mean, what did me and Mikey say last week was like, the worst thing we could do is have Robertson and Craig will play.
But it's the thing of
Visage been 1-0 up.
exactly. It's using them for a specific job, and there is a job there that they could have done. But let's move on to the positive aspects. Let's move on to how Robbie Neilson changed the game in Hearts' favour, or at least to lead to an improved Hearts performance. First and foremost, the change with Jamie Walker. Why did that have such a big impact, Ross?
Well, we were losing the battle in the final third, and Jamie Walker has proven when he's fit and willing to, get on the ball, he will do that job very, very well, and he's not scared at all. You can stick him in any type of game, he'll run right at you and try and take you on. And it seemed at times he just breezed right through them, and the fitness played a part as well. So I think Walker came on at the right time. I don't know if Stubbs, how he's working on the fitness with the team, but it really did show, and he provided a lot of crosses. And again, King through his legs, and then it went out to Eckersley, came back in, so missed it with exactly the same. We were getting more chances basically, and having three wingers on the pitch at the same time, even though Walker was playing more through the middle, he did come wide and collect the ball a few times, but I think it was because of the fitness.
While we're on that one period of the game where Patterson puts a cross in, Billy King fresh air swings, Eckersley knocks a cross in, Sam Nicholson, much as I think he's a class wee player and he will go on to have a great career, he literally flinches at that ball. It's like, oh no, it's coming right at me. Put something on it, man. Yeah. That was unreal in terms of that stage of a derby.
I think that 30-second spell summed up Nicholson and King's day for them, to be fair. It wasn't really their day, and at that age, unfortunately there's going to be a bit of inconsistency, and they did have a great game against Dumbarton last week, so I suppose we were due an off week off the pair of them. It was just a bit unfortunate that they both had to play that way.
And after that as well, after that moment, I thought that was it. It was 1-0 to Hibs.
Yeah.
And I think everyone felt the same.
Right, I think, praise Nielsen's bravery in terms of the way he reacted to the sending off. Did anyone see the fact that we would go three at the back where two central midfielders playing there and then still allow the one centre-half who was actually properly playing at centre-half to push on and score the winner? That was a brave gung-ho tactic at that stage of the game.
I'm not convinced that he maybe told him to go bombing on like that. I think he probably took that upon himself to go, I'm done with this, lad.
I'm going to say that he listened in last week and heard to what I said.
I think it highlights the importance of Gomez and Boabin, because again, we've touched on it before. If it was Robinson and Holt in the middle of the park, we wouldn't have been able to have done that.
No.
Whereas Gomez and Boabin,
Mainly because there's a combined height of about 4 feet.
Gomez and Boabin aren't the tallest guys either, but they've got a bit more sort of upper body strength, a bit more of a presence.
They win a lot of headers as well, considering.
Boabin did actually. We saw a precursor to that because he filled in at centre half a few weeks ago against Alloa as well, when Wilson had to go off injured.
So yeah, definitely, it's great when you've got those sort of guys there to rely upon to be able to change your system a little bit. And like you say, it was a brave move, but you're better doing that when you're a goal down. It's better that than just losing 1-0 and setting up 4-4-1.
Let's move on to the post-match reaction and the interviews then. How do we feel about how the managers conducted themselves afterwards? Let's focus on Stubbs in particular, because there's been on the social network and we've seen a wee reaction to the way a couple of the comments that Stubbs has dropped in. Did he get drawn into an atmosphere a wee bit too much in the aftermath corner? I'm
not sure about that. You got to bear in mind this interview was really just 5 minutes after that wonder goal, which was a complete hammer blow to everybody at the Hibs end. I think Stubbs was possibly being a bit unfair with his comments that 1,000 shots like that wouldn't have gone in. If Ross predicted it last week, then it's obviously come from somewhere. It wasn't just a freak goal, which is kind of what it was implying. Unfortunately, it was a fantastic goal, and that's just the way it is. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I think with Stubbs, I'm feeling quite positive about how he's going to react to this game and how the players are going to react. And I feel like for the first time in about 5 managers, we've got somebody who's actually got a plan, rather than somebody whose derbies are more or less going to make or break their season, or they're going to live or die. A perfect example is Pat Fenlon. He lived and died by his derby results, because we did have one season where we did quite well in the derbies, and that papered over the cracks quite a lot. But then when we lost, that was his final game. When we lost to Hearts this time last year, which I can't believe was only a year ago now. But I think Stubbs is possibly wise enough to see the bigger picture, and although that was a setback, it's not going to be, well, hopefully not going to be in May when we're looking back at the season and our year was summed up by that game at Easter Road in October. So while I understand some Hearts fans maybe thought he was being a little ungracious after the game, I think he's wise enough, he wasn't completely gutted by it, clever enough to see the bigger picture, and hopefully we're going to push on rather than letting that just take the wind out of our sails.
Mikey, I think the one point that he's been particularly criticised on is his harsh words towards the Hearts management team in terms of potentially over-celebrating the goal. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say that, or does that show... I think a lot of people think that shows a wee bit of a misunderstanding in terms of how important a goal like that can be psychologically in an Edinburgh derby. Do you think the Hearts management team did over-celebrate, or is Stubbs probably reading a wee bit too much into it?
I think he was just really disappointed. He's probably had that camera put in front of his face, like you say, about 5 minutes after the match. I think he's just a bit peeved. I don't think there's anything really a lot more to it. I'll bet my life that him and Nielsen probably had a bit of a chat after the match and had a wee cup of tea or something. I don't think there's going to be any sort of bad blood. I think we've got a Hibs manager who, I think for a change, takes these sort of results badly, when I think sometimes under some previous management there's not been that hurt losing big matches. Mm-hmm. They've kind of sort of become to accept it, and he's not particularly happy with what beat. He's decided that that's the one thing that he's going to sort of vent his frustration at, get it out of his system. But no, I think he's just frustrated. I don't think he's misinterpreted it. He still knows the Scottish game from being here previously. He's played in big matches. He knows the reaction. I think he just wanted to get something off his chest and be done with it. And I don't think that'll be anything that carries forward. I don't think Nielsen's really taken the bait on it as such either. I think he's just sort of seen it as a bit of a throwaway comment.
How did we feel Nielsen performed in the aftermath of the game then?
Well, I didn't actually catch what he said about Stubbs, so I think he educated me on that.
Well, to be honest, he didn't really say anything. I think he completely steered clear, to be honest. But it was more Stubbs that maybe got drawn into that a wee bit. But as Mikey says, Stubbs obviously had more reason to, because he was obviously going to be a wee bit more bitter at the end of the game in terms of how it went. Yeah,
I mean, he sounded quite bitter, but saying that, I don't think he believed that now, what he said. I know that he kind of maybe felt that he was a spokesman for the fans and how they were feeling, which is why he said what he said. I think if you go back and ask him now, he wouldn't be as vocal as what he was then. But in terms of Nielsen, as we know, he seems to have a really calm head on his shoulders. He was basically saying what I was saying to my mates, how we played and we deserved the point. And absolutely delighted, and hopefully he can keep that lid on it as well, because I think people will maybe start having little digs at us like Ali McCoist has in the past, and Nielsen's not risen to it yet.
I'd be curious to see how Nielsen starts to react when a few results don't go Hearts' way, because he's not an easy ride so far, but he's not had to talk about too many disappointing days.
I was delighted to see him really go for it in the celebrations as well. It's the first time I've seen that.
Scott, one really interesting insight into the Hearts dressing room was where Nielsen actually volunteered a large chunk of his team talk at half-time, where he said, weirdly, given that we're 11 games into the season, that was the first time Hearts had been behind in a game. And he said at half-time he really presented that as an opportunity to the team. Like Ross says, Ali McCoist asked questions, Kenny Miller's asked questions, Nicky Law's asked questions about but has the Hearts team got the mentality? And he presented that as an opportunity. Well, here it's live on telly, go out and show everyone that you've got the mentality, come back. That seems like quite a clever motivational technique for someone so early in their managerial career.
Yeah, and I mean, just to touch briefly back on the Alan Stubbs sort of subject, I think the problem with making a throwaway comment nowadays for a manager is with the fans' forums and the social media and shows such as this, it's hard to get away with it. I can respect that a lot of it was probably just the fact that the guy's a passionate guy. Like Mikey said, it's the first time in a while Hibs have probably had somebody like that in their dugout. If you think back to guys like Colin Calderwood, there was no hint of passion in any of their post-match interviews. But I would say the comment about the celebrations, if you actually look back at Stubbs' celebrations when Hibs scored, it was just as passionate. That's all it was. Hopefully, like Mikey says, he probably even now looks back and thinks, well, maybe that was probably a comment too far. As for Nielsen, I have to admit, he doesn't get much wrong when he's getting interviewed. and it is a fair point that might change when that sticky spell comes. But I've been very impressed by what he has to say when he gets asked about an incident, regardless of whether it's been from a Hearts player or on a Hearts player. He does seem to stick to that. Well, I'll have a look at it again. He possibly, in fact, probably would have got a very good view of the Patterson incident, but I think he's just refraining on sort of having a dig at any of his players at the end of matches, and that's probably very good with somebody like Patterson, who's still quite young and prone to probably getting a bit down if he feels like he's sort of let his teammates down. I know he was on Twitter earlier sort of apologising to the fans and his teammates, which he really doesn't have to do in public, you know. Probably just saying it.
Did he apologise to Malonga? Yeah, 'cause that's what he did.
Well, we did talk about that before the game, and I still insist that it was a clumsy tackle that turned into a vicious tackle, rather than there being sort of premeditated malice to actually go down the back of his studs. I think he's went to clip him, and then unfortunately it was quite a crude challenge.
I agree. I think if you watch it back in super slow-mo, as you see it, and it looks brutal, you actually see there's a bit of a tangle of legs first, and I think he gets caught up, and that's why it ends up being studs in the back of the knee. I think it meant to be studs down, on his heel to kind of trip him up, but
New Roy Keane.
Aye.
Callum Patterson.
Is the new Roy Keane.
It's not dear me, this shows it's taken a new look. I think just finally, because I know we've talked about this for a while now, but I think 90% of Alan Stubbs' comments were being positive about Hibs, and he seemed not to want to get drawn into talking about how the game ended and things, and obviously he had to, and any comment he made on that goal was bound to sound bitter, I think, given the timing of the interview. I know that he was on Sportssound tonight, so I don't know if he said something else, I didn't hear it.
I don't think
he wasn't offered the opportunity to talk about it very much.
Really.
Talked to Rangers and Celtic all the time.
Of course, I was Sportssound. So.
They got him on because he's an ex-Celtic player, not because he's a current Hibs manager.
Okay, so the final point on the managers then, before we move on to the final part, which is where we will analyse both teams a wee bit more. What lessons do you hope that your own manager has learned from yesterday? What lessons do you hope that Alan Stubbs has taken from yesterday on to the rest of the season?
I think that he seems to, probably a Hibs problem in the past has been we don't shut down games very well. I think he intended to do that, but just possibly put the wrong personnel into the system. So it might be that they need to find a solution to it. Is there somebody else? Like if he's now Craig's now so far out of the picture, we need to source somebody else who can be another Robertson, who is a bit more of a stopper and a guy who closes the game down. But we can take the game to teams from the very first minute and get a positive result. It was almost a very positive result, but a positive performance.
Connor, agree with that?
I think just his main goal now is make sure the heads don't go down. The next derby isn't that far away at all, and this year the derbies are more than just arbitrary. I think a lot of the time, in most league derbies, it doesn't actually mean much other than bragging rights. But this year, Hibs really, if we're going to catch up at all, we need to start doing it now. So we need to make sure that by January we've put a really decent run of results behind us. So he needs to get the team to sort of keep their heads up and say, you just need to play like that, every week for the rest of the season. I mean, keep the heads up. Don't let that last minute killer sort of be a noose around your neck and define your season. So that's one thing. And again, I think with his own substitutions, that's something he'll learn as an inexperienced manager. I think every week he seems to be finding a place for some of his players that occasionally were maybe out of favour in the past, like Scott Robertson, etc. He seems to be finding a place for everybody. He seems to be finding a first team that he likes, and we are improving. So I think he'll learn himself, reflecting back on some of the decisions he made late in the game, that maybe that wasn't the right choice to make. But all in all, I would say, the main lesson is just to keep it up.
Scott, are the lessons mainly tactical for Robbie Neilson?
Yeah, I would say so. I kind of felt like yesterday Hearts were wanting to play football for the first minute onwards, and as I said last week, you've got to win your 50-50s, you've got to win your one-on-one battles in those first 10-15 minutes, and then, and only then, do you then start thinking about maybe playing a bit of football and going on to win a game. I felt that Hibs, especially in the first half, they were winning everything. Stevenson and Gray were winning every 50-50 with King and Nicholson. The midfield, we have touched on it earlier, McGeoch and Allen were superb in that first half. Gomez and Blackburn were getting nowhere near the pair of them. Allen was actually doing two jobs. He was doing a great job in that midfield battle, but I felt he was playing Handlin's position better than Handlin. If you watched where Allen was, finding himself in pockets of space in that box, that's where Handlin should have been. Handling was nowhere near that action. I don't know where he was half the time, but that's something that these guys have touched on in previous weeks. But yeah, I just hope that maybe he'll start Payardo, or maybe he'll bring in just that third man in midfield for the next Derby match. Maybe just swamp the midfield a little bit, and then allow our wide men and so obviously to hopefully win the game for us later on in the match.
I think that possibly what Nielsen did was what Stubbs did after Ibrox, and perhaps wanted to play his system rather than playing the match. Wanted to stick to having the two guys out wide, and sort of, you guys have touched on maybe bringing Holt in for this match and going sort of man to man in the midfield and making a right good scrap. But I think Nielsen was maybe a bit guilty of sort of horses for courses and not making the wee adjustments that were required.
It's a point that Sam Allardyce made this week and got a wee bit flack for it until it came to fruition on Saturday afternoon, that he said for him there are managers in the Premier League that are beatable because they have a system that they stick to and they choose to play every single week. So you've got Pellegrini, Wenger, and he thinks Brendan Rodgers, who they pick a system that works for their team and they play it every week, whereas Mourinho and Van Gaal and guys like that will pick a system for each game, as Mikey says there, and because of that, Allardyce reckons they're much more difficult to beat. Does Nielsen need to move a wee bit more to the Mourinho side?
I think so, because we do have the players and play different types of football.
The flexibility.
We've got the flexibility there, so there's no reason not to try it. I can understand maybe if players are out of form and he's scared of bringing them in for a big game like this. For instance, like a Holt, he did score obviously against Dumbarton, but I've not seen that much from him. I would have no qualms about it of putting him in the team, but he didn't, and he tried to stick to his guns. And I was someone to say that before, that Stubbs was guilty of doing the system, like Mikey said, sticking to it. And I thought that we had more reason maybe to stick to the system as well, because we're unbeaten. Why wouldn't we? But I just think in this game the event got maybe the most of everyone, and we weren't that bad. It was not as if we were that bad, and the system didn't work. It just didn't work for spells, and we sorted it. And Nielsen just needs to work on getting the thing right in the first place, rather than trying to sort like an error here or there in the team, which I think he done really well.
I think he has identified the fact that we do need to put out different teams for different matches. I know when he signed Payardo, he did actually make that comment, look, I'm signing this guy because in certain games we're going to need someone like him in there in the middle of the park. And
he's done the same thing with the strikers, but to be fair, on Sunday he was robbed of a lot of those options. I mean Keatings and Carrick were both in the stand with us supporters.
That game would have been ideal for someone like Carrick if he'd been fit. He would have been my choice to play alongside, so you needed someone a bit more of a physical presence in there, because Fontaine was having a bit of an easy time of it, to be honest.
Which is, it's a funny thing where you keep, especially from the Rangers side, this argument about injuries and suspensions kicking in keeps coming up, and you think, do you not look at the BBC preview articles? We've already got injuries and suspensions. We've had them since the first week of the season. Callum Patterson got injured against Annan in the Petrofac Cup.
I had to get 2 emergency goalkeepers in because
exactly.
of the goalkeeping situation.
At no point have we been well off really for injuries. It just feels it because we've actually got a fairly competitive squad.
It's just the standard generic Rangers arrogant line for the week, to be honest.
It certainly is, and the fact that we're allowed to say that is why you should stay tuned to Monday Night Football. We're going to go for a short break, and we're going to come back with a short final part to discuss where both teams go from here. Stay tuned.
Radio Saltire, your number one community station.
Thank you for staying with us on Monday Night Football on Radio Saltire. Despite the fact that we've got a free weekend coming up, we've still got a massive show for you next week, haven't we, Ross?
We do, yes. We touched on it a couple of weeks ago, but just to announce again that we've got Gary Halliday from the Foundation of Hearts. He's a director there. He'll be coming on next week, mainly to discuss fan ownership, really, and how it all came about. Again, we'll probably go over the current pledge system, how it's working, possible future in terms of numbers, and how it will go down in the years to come. And I think we'll basically touch on throughout Scottish football fan ownership. So I can't wait for that. It should be good. Which
may well be relevant to Hibs very soon,
definitely,
as much as it is for Hearts at the moment. And we've got another guest, Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got Spartans FC defender Gary Senarazzo, and sorry mate if that's not how you pronounce your surname.
I thought that was pretty smooth.
I've never spoken to him by sort of formally before. We used to work together, but him and hopefully one of the coaches from Spartans are going to come along and just give us a lowdown on how they're getting on. They're playing against Clyde in the Scottish Cup this weekend, weekend, so there'll be something to talk about there, hopefully. Spartans usually have quite a good run in the Cup. I see here that they beat Burnt Island 9-0 at the weekend, and Gary got a goal, so I mean,
standard.
Flying high. And yeah, I think Spartans are a really good team. I mean, I've never actually been along to see them, but I think in the community around sort of the part of Edinburgh that me and Mikey are from, I think they're doing a lot of good stuff. I think doing a lot of good youth team things just now, training a lot of kids, letting out Ainsley Park, their ground and things. So it'll be really interesting to hear what the state of play is there, how they're getting along this year. And as well, there's this youth team set up that they've got with Hibs, which a lot of Hibs fans I think are a little confused about, don't really understand how that's working. So a bit of clarity there hopefully would be good so lots to talk about.
I've seen Spartans play once at Ainsley Park against Hearts in a friendly on an international week, and Hearts required 2 last-minute goals to rescue a draw from that game, and it was for a trophy and went to penalties, and Hearts won. And I've never seen a more muted celebration with a trophy ever, as about 2/3 of Hearts' first team who have struggled to a draw with Spartans. It was uninspiring to say the least. But if you want to meet the Monday Night Football crew in person, then you can potentially see us there on Saturday, because I think we're going to organise a day out to Spartans, aren't we?
I think so, but I heard today that half of the Spartans crowd got chucked out the other day because they were letting off smoke bombs and things, so we can't escape. I think we're going to have to be careful.
This fan culture debate will not let up, but at least we can report on that on Monday, I suppose. Right, so let's move on to the final part of the show. I simply want to know where both teams go from here. Obviously, we know they go nowhere because there's a free week, and unfortunately we've not got too many internationals nowadays in the teams, but there's some tough games coming up. On Hearts first, because we have a couple of big games: Wraith Rovers, Falkirk away, and then Rangers at Tynecastle. Is it simply imperative to try and get through the next couple of games with the unbeaten record still intact for Rangers' visit to Tynecastle?
We need that gap still there, definitely. I know Scott touched on a couple of weeks ago that he thought that Wraith Rovers at home would have been his surefire, win with hopefully a big result, and I kind of believe that as well. I think we'll win these next 2 games, but I've said it now, it probably won't happen. But I think we need that gap there. If you ask Robbie Nielsen, he want the gap as big as possible for Rangers coming, so we can afford to take a draw there. I think we'll play well in that game. I do see a win, because I don't think Rangers, as much as they've got the players in the team that can hurt us, I just don't see it all strung together. I think someone spoke to Kenny Miller during the week, and he said that it is all coming together now, apparently. But I think it's not just the players that have to come together, it's the management team, it's the way the team's put out on the park, and that's not happening yet at Rangers, and I don't think that'll happen at Tynecastle. It may come together next year after all the financial worries maybe go away, because there's a lot of problems there still to go through. But up until this next game against Rangers at Tynecastle, I believe that we need the gap still. I don't think, is it 4 points I think it could go down to?
It's 4 points now, yeah. I mean, Rangers have got a game in hand, but it's against Cowdenbeath, who are currently bottom of the table. So
we need
I'm
that gap
assuming
there.
that it's 4 points.
I would agree, definitely. We need that gap there.
Scott?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on a couple of sort of positives for yesterday, and how that's going to affect us going into the next run of games. After it, although, performance-wise we weren't great, especially for the first hour, there was a great sort of never say die attitude about the team, especially in the last 10 minutes when we were still pushing for that equaliser, and that's going to stand us in good stead, I think, for the rest of the season. Also, considering our captain went off after around an hour, I felt that Alexander, Gomez, Blabbin and especially Eckersley pushed us on in that last half an hour. It was good to see the experienced guys really push the team on when some of the younger guys weren't maybe performing to their usual high standards. And I've got no qualms in us, really. I don't think we're going to have any problem putting sort of Wraith Rovers and Falkirk to the sword. The Rangers game's going to be a big game, obviously drawn at Easter Road. I'd now like to see us beat Rangers and just sort of shut them up for a few more weeks.
Okay, on the Hibs, what are the short-term goals now?
Well, I mean, there's one thing in all the excitement of the Derby, I forgot that we're, of course, in the League Cup on Wednesday night, playing Dundee United. I think normally at this stage of the season, the way things are going, probably wouldn't be too bothered about missing out on the League Cup because it's one less thing to think about. But I think Stubbs is trying to instill a winning mentality, and aside from anything else, we're playing Dundee United. It's going to be a fantastic litmus test to see how we're actually doing. I think Dundee United are a good team, a little inconsistent, and I think if we played like we did on Saturday, we could get a good result. And as we're saying, we are struggling to get the fans in. That might be something else which encourages people along. A good run in the Cup is always entertaining, so long as it doesn't distract us from all important league duty. So I think that's it. And then after that, we've got a few games. We've got Cowden and Beath, I think, after that, and then back into the run of a few home games. So we just need to keep the momentum up. I think Stubbs has got a little time to reflect the coming weekend after the League Cup duties, and I think we more or less need to carry on the way we're going, because we're definitely improving. That's 6 games now, we're unbeaten. Things are getting better, things are falling into place. Slight work in progress, and I think just keep working on it the way it has been is the main message. I've got to say, I don't want to pick fights here, but just I'm quite surprised at how maybe not positive, but I thought Hearts fans would have been a little more disappointed in how they played in this first half, particularly.
I'm trying to give credit to Hibs. I'm not trying to.
I'm not just on that subject before we finish up. I'm just. I was a little surprised because after the game yesterday, I just drove off and didn't look at any sort of social media or anything. I was a little surprised at obviously you've got last minute goal and everything like that, but maybe argue that the draw wasn't deserved. And that's obviously. I'm going to sound quite bitter and stuff.
I'd be the same in your foot.
I think if it hadn't been for that goal, and we were talking about the game afterwards, I think no one would have been saying, Hearts were trying so hard.
Oh, we definitely would have been disappointed. Yeah, I think the big thing is though that goal did come, and that in itself implies that there's character there that potentially isn't there amongst other teams, or we've no right to have. And a team that's so young and in general terms inexperienced to be in at the top of the league, there's a character there. But also I think the thing is you've got to put it in the perspective of the league and the level of consistency that we've had throughout the season. And the fact is we didn't want that to be the day where the off day happened, but it was. And the fact is, if you play 11 games in a row as we have, a couple of them you're going to be a bit dodgy, you're going to struggle in front of goal, or you're going to struggle to set the tempo. And unfortunately it came in the worst possible day for us, but we managed to get away with a draw. And I think that's why that goal has turned everyone into a positive, because we're thinking, well, if we can get out of jail playing that badly, and we're only going to play that badly maybe once in 11 games, we've still got a really good chance of going on a run for the title.
No, absolutely, and that's the caveat to everything that we've said about Hearts and to a certain extent Hibs tonight. Is that old, it's a sign of a winning team if you can get the points even if you play poorly. But I would just from listening to you guys, I was quite surprised at how badly Hearts played in the first half in particular, and for parts of the second. A lot of these guys you've been talking about, I was quite surprised at how little influence they had on the game. So that's just something, I went away for a few hours and came back, and I was quite shocked to see Hearts fans claiming that what a deserved to draw, we fought back and everything. That's not one man in particular, not to pick fights at the end of the show. But
well, it was, objectively it was.
Well, to be fair,
draw was the right result.
And the national manager agreed with you, Ross.
Exactly.
I did actually enjoy Gordon Strachan, although he was being pretty pro Hearts. I think
his
it's
comment
quite
about
entertaining.
Malonga was priceless.
It's not Ronaldo, yeah.
It's a funny one though, in that I watch the game from the opposite perspective always. I watch the game as a Hearts fan pessimistically all the time. I'm always thinking we're far more on the ropes than we are, and then I come away for the game and hear it, and normally they'll say about Hearts dominated possession and we're comfortable, and I'm thinking I thought we were ropey at certain points of the game. But when you actually look at it, for all we would say Hibs dominated play because they looked maybe the more likely to fashion a chance or Hearts. In actual fact, the chances were fairly even, and Hearts in the end had 55% possession, which fair enough, a lot of it didn't go anywhere, but that doesn't create the impression of a team that were dominated throughout if you get 55% possession away from home. Aye.
Yeah.
I do agree, and Hibs are obviously being punished for not being able to kill games off. But I just thought that was just like my opinion. After I'd settled down a bit, sort of a few hours after the game, I was just a little surprised by that. Thought I'd throw that in there just to.
I think what it is we're happy that we went down to 10 men, and we were the better team. Where else can you get that, especially in a derby? We were very happy at the end of the day with, especially with that goal. I think our heads we're still in cloud 9 after that goal.
Right, let's wrap up on that then. I feel like we've not really spoken about the goal enough.
Why not, son?
So, what the final question I think that we'll leave on, has there ever been a better Derby goal?
No.
Yes.
In-
Russell Latipi 6-2, 1-2 mix with Pat Linen. Absolutely phenomenal.
What was the score at that point in the game?
That was
was
the
the
sixth. That was the last goal.
That was a 6-1.
Does that not mean that it's a bit because there was less pressure on that moment, but everyone's free to express themselves when the game's
Quality
5-1?
of goal was just like never seen in a derby. Like for to have like that quality of football in a derby match.
I know what you're saying.
Phenomenal.
I just think there is an element of if he hits that shot and it goes into row S, the back row of the lower tier, he gets absolutely caned for that. And he has been caned on this show previously for doing that. For that to be the one moment that he comes up with it, there's an extra pressure there that makes the goal even better, if you know what I mean.
There's two ways of looking at it. I think from a significant standpoint, the Ostert goal counts for more.
Yeah.
The Latipi goal's one of those ones that's in folklore. It was the sixth goal on a very special night for Hibs fans. I did actually write in my recent blog for the show that, you know, the Latipi goal was one of the finest goals I've seen in a derby, and I still stick that. Technically speaking, it is probably up there with one of the finest goals I've seen in any game. But yeah, the Ostert goal, I mean, I think there was just under 4,000 Hearts fans. That I've never heard a collective groan like that since Wayne Foster ran through in goal 20 years ago. I mean, everyone was just going, pass, or didn't he shoot? And I just sort of went, oh, no. And then 10 seconds later, I was like, I can't believe he's actually scored. And to be fair to Stubbs, that was one comment I'd probably agree with. He probably won't score another one like that for 1,000 shots.
It was very similar to Austin McCann at Tynecastle against Celtic in the last minute about 10 years ago. But to be fair, Ozturk at least takes free kicks and stuff. He obviously has some element of technique. Austin McCann had almost zero footballing technique, and that was clearly a kick it as hard as I can job. And I remember the exact, saying, please don't shoot, and then he shoots.
Bobo Baldi was running towards him and he just thought, I'm going to hit this.
Panicked.
before he hits me.
Yeah, definitely. But it had elements of that to it. Ross, what do you think? The best Derby goal
I
you've seen?
can't be far from Mikey if you tried. That was the best Derby goal. It was. I mean, if you basically that was put out to the world, they saw that. And if you put those goals together and said, right, who do you think is better? What are they going to say? They're going to say Ozturk. Of course they are. 40 yards. 40 yards. Technique was spot on. Absolutely brilliant. The way he hit it, you couldn't hit it any harder. The dip on it, the way it hit in the goal, it bounced into the net as well. The distance, the time in the game, the importance of the shot, the fact that you touched on, that if he got that wrong, that was it. And that was it. The unbeaten run's finished. So yeah, absolutely the best Derby goal for me.
We're never going to get a consensus, a definitive answer.
I don't think so.
But the big thing for me is it's rare that you will get such a moment in a game where it's so clearly hero or villain, and it's as simple as that. If you carve that into the stand, then you are a laughing stock, and Ozturk has bordered done that already. There's a lot of people who now wait for Ozturk to make a mistake because he's a wee bit too casual, he's a wee bit too laid back, and he's got an element of thinking he's better than he is. When he puts that in, he's instantly now a cult hero.
Well, the consensus we can come to is that's the best Hibs Derby goal. That's the best Hearts Derby goal.
I think
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think context is a big
I've always
thing.
been slightly sort of like dismissive of how good a goal the lad.
I think context is obviously a big thing for the goal yesterday as well, and I think a lot of Hibs fans were walking out like I walked out like everyone else, bewildered. Lots of guys on their phones just saying, "I've just seen the goal of the season." Unfortunately, it was in the last minute of the derby, and
Right, kicker.
it's the sort of goal that maybe against a different team in different circumstances you'd almost be tempted to clap, but it was something special, and unfortunately, just the timing and the context I think is why Ross is getting so excited about it. I think if you did play, I think if you played the goal, without all the context about the unbeaten run in the 92nd minute of the local derby, then it maybe wouldn't have quite as much significance.
Yeah, if the goals were scored in the other order, it would certainly have met a different reaction. It still would have been, on Facebook and stuff as a wonder goal, but it wouldn't have been quite as hysterical a reaction. There's no doubt about that. But that's why it was a great derby moment. Even from a Hibs perspective, you can see how those are the things that make great games. And as we've said, it was a great advert for the Edinburgh Derby. People seem to be impressed at the quality of football generally on show, and that's a positive thing, because really at this moment in time both clubs should be at the lowest ebb they've been at in a long time. There should almost be an element of embarrassment at where we've found ourselves currently, but there doesn't have to be, because we're actually thriving at the moment, and hopefully with Hibs getting a positive result, although it went a wee bit pear-shaped at the end, we will see the attendances improve, and we will start to see a bit momentum from both Edinburgh clubs, and we can go on and make sure that Rangers finish third
I've
at
got to
best.
say, after yesterday, I was raring for the next derby. I was like, right, January's not that far away. It's only really a couple of months, so I definitely didn't feel like that. The last derby at Easter Road, the Terry Butcher's last derby, came out just like, if we can stay up next year, we won't have to play them for 2 years. That's going to be brilliant. So I think it's good to be rearing up, like, God, I can't wait to play them again and put things right. So that's good as well. I think looking forward to these games again.
It definitely feels like there's a rivalry coming back now. That both Hibs they've still got a long way to go. Don't get me wrong. In terms of certainly off the park, there's a solution that needs to be found. But on the park, they're finding a wee bit of identity again. And there's definitely going to be a clash of styles and a clash of philosophies, but in a positive sense. The big thing is, hopefully, both teams can take points off Rangers and make this a genuine fight. And I know. One interesting question: if Hibs continue to falter a wee bit against teams out with, when Rangers come to Easter Road, you know that every single Jambo, as we were a few weeks ago and we were ecstatic on air, every single Jambo is going to be behind Hibs when Rangers come to Easter Road. Does that make it bittersweet at all? Does that make it... Is there any question of, we're doing the Jambos a favour here, or does that not even come into it?
I don't think so. I think most people in Scotland would love it if Hearts and Hibs both went back up at the expense of Rangers, and if that means a little bit of, the old uncomfortable bedfellows thing, then so be it, because I think I think there's no reason why Hibs can't catch up with Rangers. I mean, there's still 3/4 of the season to go. There's no reason why we can't continue as we have been for the last few weeks and catch up with Rangers and really battle it out at the top, possibly a little bit too far behind Hearts now, unless they have a complete meltdown. So I don't see a problem with that at all. And if come January Hibs and Hearts have both beaten Rangers again, I mean, that would just be amazing. If we've both got a good run behind us and it's another sort of important game, a must-win game for both teams that are both looking good, and it could be a really exciting match.
Well, that seems as good a place to leave it as any. Against all odds, Edinburgh football is in rude health, and the derby yesterday merely illustrated that. Thank you very much for joining us on Monday Night Football. Join us next week for some Foundation of Hearts and Spartans chat. Get your questions to us on Facebook and Twitter at facebook.com/Monday Night Football and at MN Football on Twitter. We'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.